Hi there, history buffs and meme enthusiasts. Welcome back to the Accent of History, where we dig up the past, dust it off, and find out how humanity survived despite making some very questionable life choices. Today, we've got not one, not two, but 10 hilarious stories from history that will leave you laughing and saying, wait, did that really happen? So grab a snack because this is going to be a ride. Let's dive in. Napoleon's rabbit disaster. Napoleon Bonaparte, conqueror of Europe, tactical genius and rabbit hunter? Well, not quite. After signing the Treaty of Tilsit in 1807, Napoleon decided to celebrate his victory in style, with a rabbit hunt. His men gathered hundreds, maybe even thousands of rabbits for the event. According to legend, in July 1807, Napoleon's chief of staff, Alexandre Berthier, organized the rabbit hunt for his esteemed master. He invited Napoleon and his entourage to a park he owned within Paris and was ecstatic when the emperor actually accepted the invitation. He made sure to do everything he could to make the hunt as pleasing for Napoleon as possible, and the day started with a splendid breakfast. The only thing that Berthier had not been able to organize from within his property were the rabbits themselves. Breakfast finished, the rabbits were released in the park so they can start the hunt. But there was a small, fluffy problem. The rabbits weren't wild. They were domesticated and well-fed, very well-fed. The huge horde started to bolt and split in different directions in an attempt to avoid the attacks that Napoleon and his companions were firing at them. Then the strangest thing happened. The herd of rabbits converged into one large mass, turned around and swarmed towards Napoleon. Shock hit the party, and the angry Berthier immediately organized the coachmen into a battalion armed with their long riding whips to knock them back. Initially, this organization worked and the rabbits started to flee again. The party considered it a bizarre delay, but were preparing to resume their hunt. The rabbits turned around and flanked the party on the left and right. They attacked Napoleon with an unspeakable frenzy, climbing up his legs and swarming him so much that he stumbled. Realizing this was not a fight he could win, Napoleon fled to his carriage, but the rabbits followed him and climbed upon it. Eventually, the party was able to escape. But this was a quite funny story if you ask me. And the moral of the story is that you should never underestimate the power of a hungry rabbit, or a hungry anything for that matter. The Great Emu War. Next up, Australia. Now, if you know anything about Australia, you know it's a place where even the wildlife is ready to throw down. Like this kangaroo right here. Look at this MMA kangaroo, okay? He looks dangerous. It seemed that guy was even more dangerous. Props for saving your dog, man. I mean, mate. Props for saving your dog, mate. But in 1932, things got weird when the government declared war on emus. You see, thousands of emus had started invading farmland, trampling crops and making life miserable for farmers. So in November 1932, 3 members of the Royal Australian Artillery traveled to the Campion district. I think this is how it's pronounced, I don't know. Major Meredith was in command, Sergeant McMurray and Gunner O'Halloran. The group had 2 Lewis automatic machine guns and 10,000 rounds of ammunition. They were also accompanied by a guy with a camera. That was their misfortune. So these 3 guys, 2 of them equipped with machine guns, were called in to deal with the problem. What followed was a series of comical skirmishes where the emus proved to be surprisingly hard to hit. These birds could actually outrun the trucks and dodge bullets like they were in the Matrix. On November 2nd, the 3 team members employed formation tactics against a group of roughly 50 emus. When the soldiers opened fire, the birds scattered in all directions, making them extremely difficult targets. On November 4th, the soldiers laid an ambush for the emus at a water source. The gunners waited to open fire until thousands of emus were in range. However, one of the guns jammed after just a few rounds, and the emus quickly scattered. After 3 days of this operation, only about 30 emus had been killed. The emus were outsmarting the gunners. Farmers attempted to herd the emus using trucks, but this provided ineffective. One truck even crashed after hitting an emu. I don't know how, but it did. A gunner tried shooting from a truck, but the emus were faster than trucks on rough terrain, and the machine guns had difficulty in aiming. This also highlighted a further problem. Emus have tough hides, and that's why a glancing bullet from a machine gun rarely leads to severe injury for an emu. It was also difficult to judge the immediate effectiveness of an attack, as some emus kept running after being shot and only later died of their injuries. By November 8, news reports had widely publicized the failure of the emu war. Members of the Australian House of Representatives made light of the situation, joking that if anyone deserved medals spoils from the conflict, it were the emus, who had won every single round so far. Meredith and his team withdrew on November 8, but local farmers demanded their return. Get back here and kill those emus. They are messing with our crops. A report that 300 emus had been killed justified Pierce's decision to redeploy the machine gunners on November 12. After wasting thousands of rounds of ammunition and failing to make a dent in the emu population, the government gave up. The emus had won. The Great Emu War remains one of the most bizarre military campaigns in history. Australia may have lost the battle, but the emus gained legendary status. Andrew Jackson's swearing parrot. Moving on to the United States. Andrew Jackson, 7th president and all-around tough guy, was known for being a bit intense. But what you might not know is that he had a pet parrot named Paul, and Paul had quite the vocabulary. Listen, parrots can have foul temperaments. A long viral internet rumor claimed that US President Andrew Jackson's pet parrot got so rowdy and profane at Jackson's funeral that it had to be removed. Imagine removing a parrot from a funeral. According to Dan Feller, professor of history at the University of Tennessee and editor at the Papers of Andrew Jackson Project, Jackson bought the parrot for his wife Rachel for $25 on the 5th of June 1827. But Rachel died in 1828. Maybe this parrot was actually a curse. And Paul remained at the Hermitage, which conducts tours for visitors around Jackson's historic home. So, as I said, fast forward to Jackson's funeral in 1845, as mourners gathered to pay their respects, Paul decided to steal the show by loudly cursing in front of everyone. And we're not talking mild cursing, okay? This parrot was dropping bombs left and right. It got so bad that they had to remove the bird from the funeral. Imagine trying to hold back tears while a parrot yells obscenities. Classic Jackson, even in death. What a show, man. Russia selling Alaska for pennies. Let's talk about one of history's biggest oopsies. In 1866, the Russian government offered to sell the territory of Alaska to the United States. Secretary of State William H. Seward, enthusiastic about the prospects of American expansion, negotiated the deal for the Americans. Eduard de Stoichel, I don't know how this is pronounced. Eduardo, let's say. He was a Russian minister to the United States and negotiated for the Russians. On the 30th of March 1867, the two parties agreed that the United States would pay Russia $7.2 million for the territory of Alaska. At that time, for Russians, it seemed like a smart move. Alaska was cold, remote, and didn't seem to have much going for it. For less than 2 cents an acre, guys, 2 cents an acre, the United States acquired nearly 600,000 square miles. Opponents of the Alaska purchase persisted in calling it Seward's Folly or Seward's Icebox. Until 1896, when the Great Klondike Gold Strike convinced even the harshest critics that Alaska was a valuable addition to the American territory. If you wonder how much in today's currency $7.2 million is, well, it's around $153 million now in today's money. But then came the gold rush and later the discovery of oil. Suddenly, that frozen wasteland looked a lot more valuable. Probably this is a decision Russia regrets even today. The exploding pants epidemic. Now we're heading to New Zealand in the 1930s, where farmers had a unique problem. Exploding pants. How, you ask? Well, farmers started using a chemical weed killer made from sodium chloride. It was effective, but there was only one tiny issue: it was highly flammable. One day, a working farmer learned this the hard way when he caused a spark and his pants caught fire. Suddenly, he was doing a dance no one wanted him to perform, the "My pants are on fire" jig. Several similar incidents followed, leading to what historians now call the exploding pants pandemic. Just imagine trying to explain that to your friends, guys. Yeah, mate, my trousers went kaboom while I was weeding. New Zealand, where even farming can be dangerous. In their May 2006 Exploding Pants episode, the popular US television show Mythbusters investigated the idea that trousers could explode based on the events of New Zealand. Experimenters tested 4 substances on 100% coal overalls: a paste comprising of a mixture of gunpowder and water, a herbicide from the 1930s, which was sodium chloride, a fertilizer from the 1930s, and gun cotton, the common name for nitrocellulose. Each of these were put to 4 different ignition methods: flame, radiant heat, friction, and impact. Yeah, they actually caught on fire. Upon exposed to flame, radiant heat, and impact, although the friction test did not cause ignition. However, combustion is the exothermic chemical reaction between a fuel and an oxidant. It's not the same as an explosion, which involves a rapid increase in volume accompanied by the release of energy in an extreme manner, like a shockwave. Even so, a person witnessing such an event, especially if they were wearing the pants, would likely describe such a sudden event as an explosion. Maybe this is where the liar liar pants on fire expression came from. And speaking of pants, the accidental ban on pants in Paris. Ah, Paris, the city of love, fashion and apparently outdated laws. In the year 1800, Paris passed a law requiring women to get police permission before wearing pants. Why? Because back then, wearing pants was considered scandalous for women. It was modified in 1892 and 1909 to allow women to wear trousers only if they were holding a bicycle handlebar or the reins of a horse. That's kind of weird, right? Even for France. During the French Revolution, Parisian women had requested the right to wear trousers, and working class revolutionaries became known as sans-culottes for wearing trousers instead of the silk knee breeches preferred by the bourgeoisie. I also don't know how to pronounce this. What can I do, man? This is French. The law was largely ignored, but technically it stayed in effect until 2013. That's over 200 years of illegal pants wearing. Imagine being stopped by a police officer in the 1800s. Excuse me, madam, do you have a permit for those pants? Paris may have had revolutions, but clearly they missed the real fight for freedom, fashion freedom. Operation Paul Bunyan. Now let's head to Korea in 1976. After 2 US officers were killed by North Korean soldiers while trimming a tree in the demilitarized zone, tensions skyrocketed. The US needed to respond. They launched Operation Paul Bunyan, a massive military operation to cut down a tree. The Korean Demilitarized Zone, or DMZ as it was called, was established after the Korean War in 1953, dividing North and South Korea. Despite its name, the DMZ was one of the most heavy militarized borders in the world. During the Cold War, it symbolized the bitter rivalry between communist North Korea, backed by the Soviet Union and China, and the US allied South Korea. The fragile peace was constantly tested by military posturing, skirmishes, and espionage, with soldiers from both sides stationed just meters apart, ever ready for conflict. In this tense atmosphere, even the smallest incident could risk escalating into war. They sent hundreds of troops, tanks, and helicopters to protect a group of men armed with chainsaws. It was the most over-the-top landscape job in history. Fortunately, no further conflict erupted as the US got to keep the firewood. The bakers who saved Vienna. In 1683, Vienna was under siege by the Ottoman Empire. One night, as enemy troops were tunneling beneath the city, a group of bakers working late heard the digging sounds. They raised the alarm and Vienna's defenders were able to stop the attack. To celebrate the victory, legend has it that the bakers created the croissant, which is shaped like the Ottoman crescent. So the next time you enjoy a flaky, buttery croissant, remember you're biting into a symbol of defiance. History has never tasted so good. Canada accidentally attacks itself. Oh, Canada, the land of politeness, maple syrup, and accidental warfare. In 1837, during the Upper Canada Rebellion, a group of rebels found themselves in a sticky situation when they accidentally fired on their own reinforcements. Let me give you some context and detail. The Upper Canada Rebellion of 1837 was an armed uprising against the British colonial government by some unhappy reformists. Canadians wanted to obtain their independence from the British Empire. Led by William Lyon Mackenzie, the rebels wanted to establish a more democratic government. Things were tense, emotions were high, and everyone was ready to fight, except they weren't exactly military geniuses. At one point, during the rebellion, a group of rebel forces found themselves in what they thought was a standoff with British loyalist troops. Guns were loaded, orders were shouted, and before anyone had time to think, shots were fired. The problem? Well, the enemy they had just attacked wasn't the British, it was their own reinforcements. Imagine being one of those poor reinforcements marching in with confidence only to be met by a hail of bullets from your own side. The battle ended in utter confusion, proving that even in rebellion, Canadians are just polite. Otto the Great's sneaky sleepover. Finally, we have Otto the First, Holy Roman Emperor and master of sneaky tricks. In the 10th century, Otto invited a rival leader for what seemed like a friendly meeting, but Otto had a trick up his sleeve, or rather in his camp. His troops disguised themselves as servants and snuck into the rival's camp at night. When morning came, Otto captured the rival without a fight. It was the medieval equivalent of saying, "Surprise, you're under my management now." It was a brilliant and bloodless victory. Instead of engaging in a costly battle, Otto had used deception and strategy to outsmart his rival. With Berengar captured, Otto secured his control over Italy and went on to be crowned Holy Roman Emperor by the Pope in 962. This event marked the beginning of what would later become the Holy Roman Empire, a political entity that lasted for nearly 1,000 years. And there you have it, guys, 10 of history's funniest stories. If you enjoyed this wild ride through time, hit the like button, subscribe to this channel, and let me know in the commentaries which story was your favorite. Until next time, stay curious, stay quirky, and remember, history is cool if you know how to present it. Bye.